Welcome to Motivation Monday, where we start off your week with challenging conversations and inspiring stories. Well, where are you tuned in from? Where are you listening to us from? Kindly send us your feedback and comments. If you're on SMS, that's 20316, WhatsApp 0786 316 316. Also, this is a good reminder that we are spread out throughout Kenya. And so if you're in Nairobi, our frequency is 103.9 FM, Nyeri 87.9 FM, Mombasa 97.9 FM, Nakuru 102.1 FM, Meru 107.7 FM, and Kisumu 96.5 FM. Now, in the recent past, the church has received quite a number of attacks, especially with what have come to be termed as the Gen Z protests and movement. The church has been considered complicit in the oppression that the people have gone through. The church has been considered to lay back and not do anything. But well, is this really the entire story? Is this the whole story? Or has the church just failed in telling its own story? Today, we are talking about the power of a story, and helping us have this conversation is just the man for it, both a communication specialist, but also a pastor of a local church. And so help me welcome Pastor David Kuria. Welcome, sir.
Asante. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, what a privilege and an honor to have sitting with you.
I'm glad. It's been a long time since I've been here, so it's good to be here with you today.
Asante sana. Kindly just let us know, by way of introduction, who is Pastor David Kuria?
You know, if you introduced me, I don't know what else to say. But David Kuria, that's my name. I am someone who is passionate about the church. I think first and foremost, I think it's my main area of passion. But I'm also very passionate about media and communications, and about the nexus between media, communications, church, and faith as well. Yeah. So that has allowed me to work in communications. I've been working in communications for a number of years. I've worked as a communications consultant. I ran my own consultancy. And then I'm, as you said, also very fortunate to be the pastor of a local assembly here, Mavuno Church Lavington, that meets out in Lavington, Nairobi. And that's about it. I am a husband of one, a father of two, and someone who just believes in the power, the purpose, and the mission of the local church. Yeah.
Thank you. You've given us a glimpse, and by the way, a shout out to your church, Mavuno Lavington.
Mavuno Church Lavington. Shout out to you guys, everyone who's out there from Mavuno Church Lavington.
All right. Yep. All right. You've given us just a tidbit of, especially within your line of communication, but help us appreciate, because you say this is something you're passionate about. Just a bit of your background and how you came to this space where this is actually a passion that you have.
It's such an interesting, it's a long story though. I'll try and give you habari kwa ufupi, a short story. But when I went into campus, I'm one of those guys who had absolutely no idea what I wanted to study. Everyone around me was completely certain I want to do engineering, I want to do this. I had no clue. And I went into a business degree because I thought to myself, if I do like a Bachelor of Business, there are many options for me. But by the time it came to specializing, I still had no idea what to do. By the grace of God, one of the classes I really enjoyed was marketing. So I went and studied marketing as a result. That's actually what my primary training is in. Obviously, communications is very close to marketing. While I was doing that, I had the opportunity to work on a radio station. And I just began to see media. I began to see the power of media and whatnot. Now, I had no idea that there'd be a connection between these two things one day. And then after that, I went to theological college for a season. And I was fortunate to be, out of the country. I came back into the country. I had these three things, marketing, radio, and theology. I remember going for one of my very first interviews when I came, and the guy looked at my thing and he didn't even interview me. He closed it, pushed it back, and he said, "You're confused." It's like, do you want to work in marketing here? Do you want to be our chaplain? What do you want? And he told me, go figure out yourself. Yeah. But I didn't realize, Scripture talks about this thing of the steps of the righteous are ordered by God.
By the Lord, yeah.
And I didn't realize that God was preparing me. He had given me such unique experiences, and they came together in one fantastic melting point, where eventually I would begin to work in communications, which is marketing for the church, which helps me with theology. But then I began to understand media and the power of media, as well as I worked on this. It was a community radio station, but I really learned a lot out of it. And just fast forward is I eventually ended up working at a church, Mavuno Church. And one day they kicked me. They violently removed me from the job I loved and dumped me into a different role as head of communication. And I was so upset. But sometimes your foolishness prevents God from working in your life. And your stubbornness and how obstinate you can be. And I didn't realize that God was sending me into a place where, I would discover my purpose, I would discover my passion. Now where I am today, I love the fact that there's just this, as I said, nexus between faith and church and mission and media and communications on the other end. I could talk about it for a long time, but that's a story.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the things, and I mean, being the pastor of a local church, perhaps you felt it during this period of the Gen Z movement protests. The church really was on the receiving end in terms of the attacks. We were considered to just be either sitting on the fence or on the side of the oppressor. We were considered to be complicit, the proceeds of corruption. It was said, we were partakers of the same. What were your reflections, around that time as you considered everything that was being said against the church?
I think there's two ways, there's two truths that exist. They may seem like they're fighting each other, but they're actually complementary truths.
Yeah.
On one hand, I think there's truth to what people were saying. Because I think, to be honest, I don't think what people were upset about was that the church was quiet during this period. I think what people were upset about is that over a period of time, they saw what seemed like an unholy marriage between the church and the state. Where, as you have said, there was a season where nobody asked questions about where are these funds coming from. We were just happy to receive them for fundraisings and whatnot. No one asked questions, about allowing politicians to, in a sense, and I use the word, carefully, but the truth is that we allow them to prostitute themselves on our shrines and on our pulpits. So I think that there are things that people had seen, and then there was also a sense that where is the voice when there is injustice? So on one hand, there was great truth to that narrative. But there's another part of the story which I think the issue at that point was not that the church was quiet, because the church wasn't quiet. Now this is the part of the story that people don't like hearing. We have a number of bodies in Kenya that kind of represent the church. You've got the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, EAK. You've got the National Council of Churches of Kenya, NCCK. You've got the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops, the KCCB, and there's the Anglican Church of Kenya, ACK as well. Now, when the finance bill was coming out, every single one of these had engaged. Every single one of them had written their submissions. Every one of them had engaged in public debate around, and there's record of that. Every one of them had done a press statement saying, reject this thing. So the challenge wasn't that the church was quiet, if we were to be completely honest. And these things, but you just need to Google. Just NCCK reject finance bill. Just Google that and see, and you will see it for yourself. But I think, so the issue is not that the church was quiet. The church spoke. Everyone who represented us was at the table speaking. I think part of the challenge, in my humble opinion, is the fact that some of the platforms that we were on is not where the conversations were going on. So you release a press statement. Who on TikTok is going to read your press statement? Do you know what I mean? Who on Instagram is going to know that there was a press conference somewhere? Part of the struggle that we had is, how do you package the narrative and the story that we have? How are we able to tell our part of this narrative in a way that people will hear, will understand, will appreciate? Right now the biggest social media platform is WhatsApp. The biggest social media platform globally. And And I'm like, how do we begin to create this narrative in a way that's engaging, that's shareable on WhatsApp so people can know, hey, this is what we as the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya are saying about this, beyond just a press statement and putting it on our website.
Yeah.
Nobody even goes to websites anymore, not with social media. So I think part of the challenge was, yes, on one hand, we were seen as complicit, but that was more long-term. In the short term, there was a sense of silence, but I don't believe it was a real silence.
Yeah.
I think it was a silence.
Perceived.
It was a perceived silence. And it was a silence because we have to understand how to begin to enter the spaces to be able to tell our story passionately. I can talk about it, but that's...
Yeah. I mean, I like that. The fact that it seemed as though the church was silent, and yet perhaps it wasn't. But is this perhaps not the same things that keeps happening? Because I remember during COVID, it was the same conversation. Pre-COVID, the church, was always speaking out against, what now we have come to embrace. Whether you're talking about live streaming, we had numerous phrases like bedside Baptist and other kind of phrases. And then COVID comes and it's a total shift. How did you see that affect and influence the church?
COVID was obviously this disastrous global pandemic. I mean, people lost their lives, they lost their livelihoods, their jobs and whatnot. And it was very difficult globally. But the silver lining in this thing was the fact that the church began, and this is a global thing, began to see the need to engage in the media space and to invest much more in the media space. Now, there are organizations, churches, there are people of faith who are already, pioneering and who had entered this space. But what's interesting is that it is said that, I forget what journal I read this from. I'd have to look it up. But it is said that during the pandemic, the one industry that created the most amount of content was the church.
Wow.
It was. It actually was the church. But we don't see it that way because we think of content as, an Instagram video or stories or a meme or whatnot. But the reality is, forget content in terms of technology and media. Content is about ideation. It's about thought. Every week, churches are creating an incredible amount of content. Sermons are being preached. Music is being done. That is content.
Yep.
What COVID enabled us to do is to be able to begin to package this content. And as a result, everybody, because I worked as a communication consultant during COVID, and it was so interesting. Many churches calling me and saying, help us. Yeah. Help us get into the digital space. Help us get into the tech space. There are churches I went to that I was very surprised. Big churches across, in Nairobi that everybody, if I mention them, everyone knows them. Who had not invested in a single camera. One camera. They had not invested in one single camera. They just did not see the need for it. But COVID was able to open us up to make us engage with content, to package content and present content in a way that we hadn't done. And again, this is a global phenomenon. Yeah. Today, as a result, churches, I see, your church streaming its service, and I've watched it and I've watched you preaching online without having to come. In fact, I was out of the country when I watched it. And now there's much more content that's being created. I think the challenge we have is how we are packaging that content post-COVID.
And so that packaging of the content, is that what we are talking about, the ability to tell a story? Is that synonymous, so to speak?
I think it is part of it for sure. Telling your story. Here's the thing about storytelling generally. Yeah. They say, if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. Your story will be told. Yeah. The story of the church is an interesting story. And if we don't tell it, what's happening within our churches, someone else will tell it. And that's why you'll see on social media, I don't remember the time we talked a lot about 310 and to do which church are, trending for all the wrong reasons. The church is a story people are interested in. Our inability to be able to tell it properly I think is really what impacts the generations and society.
Yeah.
So I think on one hand, it's our ability to say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we are about. This is what we believe in. I'll give you a good example. I was reading a story about something on social media about a couple who were in a marriage, and they said that their pastor kind of not forced them, but kind of like coerced or pushed them to stay together, even though it was an abusive relationship. And now, the church and the pastor has been put on blast. And the narrative that he tells at the end of the day is that where marriage is concerned, the church is not the place to turn to. That's the narrative that is eventually being crafted inadvertently. That the church will not look out for your best interests. They will keep you in a place that is, in the words of our society, toxic, with narcissists, until the day you die, you're given a black eye, or you break a bone. Now the problem with that is that when you allow your story to be told that way, it doesn't tell the full story.
It's true.
It doesn't tell. I mean, you're a pastor. It doesn't tell the story of the number of times you have sat with couples counseling them. No one tells that story. It doesn't tell the story of premarital counseling, where couples come together, they know nothing about how to manage their money together, how to treat in-laws, how to manage conflict. And I tell you what, every single week, the church is investing in people's marriages, in helping build the foundations of marriage, in helping people grow together in their intimacy, in helping them solving their conflict. Now, when we don't tell this part of the story, what happens is that, someone else tells the juicy part of it, the part that for them works well. And that's why I said this is the power of storytelling, being able to package it in a way. So yes, on one hand, it is we are not telling our stories, but on the other hand, we are not entering the platforms where our stories can be consumed.
Okay. Wow. And I think I want us to just welcome back. This is Motivation Monday, where we bring you challenging conversations and inspiring stories. Today, we are talking about the power of a story, and specifically as we look at how the church can be able to tell its stories. We'd love to hear from you, and so send us your comments, your feedback. 20316 is our SMS line. 0786316316 is our WhatsApp line. And joining us here is Pastor David Kuria. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, just before we listen to that song, you are helping us appreciate the fact that despite the church having content and a story to tell, sometimes we're not in the platforms where that story can actually be told. Just mention something about that.
Yeah. So what the church creates, for instance, is what's called long format content.
Yeah.
So I'll go and I'll preach a sermon for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Now, think about every single sermon that is preached, even just in Nairobi on a Sunday morning. There must be thousands and thousands. That's all content.
Yeah.
Now, if we were to capture that content like many churches are doing today, including our own churches, then what we do is we focus on putting out long format content. Here's my sermon, go and read it.
Yeah.
And the question that we're asking, we need to kind of grapple with is, okay, so what are people consuming? Right now, what people are consuming is short format content. And that's why platforms like TikTok have blown up the way that they have. They're it's short, it's catchy. No, I'm not saying that you change your messaging, or because the message is sacrosanct. The message of Christ, that's the gospel. It's what we talk about. We don't change that. But it's just asking, okay, how do we begin to package it? And there are many Christian people, many churches, many people of faith who are doing this. But I do think it's a challenge we must continually rise to, is to say, how do we begin to enter the spaces? Create the content that allows us to enter those spaces. But I think also there's a place for it where Christian people must also see themselves as carriers of the message and the story of the church, and begin to enter into. So, for instance, when we talked, about the Reject Finance Bill thing that happened a couple of a couple of weeks, very recently, is to say, when I say, hey, the church is quiet, I'm like, okay, so who is that?
Yeah.
It's a contentious conversation, but there's truth to it. Is who is it? And how do we arm our people to be able to enter into those conversations as well? So I think the point is that we are creating content, we are telling story. We need to be more intentional about storytelling, but we also need to figure out about how to package and enter into spaces. Are we on TikTok?
Yeah.
Are we on stories? Stories, stories, YouTube shorts, things like that have really kind of blown up.
Yeah, and it's true. The church, and here institutionally and organizationally, may not be in those spaces or may not take advantage of those spaces. But I know many believers who are doing fantastic things in those spaces. But where is the disconnect in the sense that as believers, as Christians, we've not appreciated this thing called the church is more than just the organization, the institution. Where is the place of our collective voice, so to speak?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'll tell you what I think. May not be the most popular perspective.
Yeah.
We have a critical discipleship problem. We have discipleship failure.
Yeah.
Is what we have. We have created spaces of consumption. So that there's this Sunday space that I go to where I go to consume. I go and say, let me see who's preaching today.
I don't like that.
I didn't enjoy that song so much. I wish they could sing the other one. Why are we talking about this again? Why can't we talk about this? Where is the customer feedback survey form so that I can say, I don't enjoy this topic, I'd rather do this one. And inadvertently, what we've created is this huge consumer culture. And with consumer culture, what happens is that we don't see ourselves as a part of this thing. We come to a show, and we've come to elevate the institution above the body.
Okay.
And the reality is Christ didn't die for the Anglican Church of Kenya.
It's true.
He died for individual people, that they would become a part of the body of Christ. Let me tell you, I've preached this thing and people have walked away. I'm telling you, it's a true story. I'm preaching at church and people have unfriended me on social media because they're like, no, you're gaslighting us and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But we have a critical discipleship problem where Christian people, they have this escape pod. Whenever the heat is turned up on the church, you press the button and you escape. And you say, and yet the church is doing nothing. The church is saying nothing. And not realizing that the reality of the situation is that the Lord saved you and made you a part of the body. Let me give you an illustration.
Yeah.
Let's assume you worked for a bank. Let's look for a fictitious bank. It's called the Blue Bank of Africa. Picture yourself one day going onto social media and saying, hey, there's a new savings product that the Blue Bank has released. I would not do it if I was you. I would not try it if I was you. You just picture what will happen. Whether you are a senior employee or not, picture what will happen. What will happen is that very quickly your things will be boxed. Your email will be revoked, your access will be revoked, and you'll be kicked out of the building.
That's true.
We understand that in secular world, but somehow the principle doesn't carry over. Where when it comes to matters of faith, I have an escape pod. The people who are blasting the church when he talked about Occupy churches were who?
It's Christians.
It's Christian people.
Yeah.
And that's a failure of discipleship. It's a failure of understanding that you are this thing that we are attacking.
Yeah.
And why I bring it up in this conversation is to say this. Is to say that if I began to understand my role as a member of the body of Christ, then what my role becomes is to build the body of Christ. People come to me. As I told you, I lead a church now. People come to me and say, hey, why isn't the church saying anything about the environment and about the degradation of the environment? Don't you care about it? You need to speak about it. You need to teach about it. You need to. And then someone else will come to me and say, hey, are you not concerned about street children? Because they're passionate about it. They're like, why aren't you preaching sermons about it? Someone else will come and say, hey, are you not concerned about justice in our nation? Why aren't you preaching about it? And I listen to all of this and I say, hey, listen, if I preached on all those things, when did I preach about Christ? When did I preach about, the saving message of the gospel? What you don't realize is that the Lord has given you a passion and made you a part of this body. So you are passionate about the environment. I know nothing about the environment. What I know is don't litter. What I know is that, the basic things. I mean, maybe I'm simplifying it, but I know the basic things about it.
Yeah.
You're the one who can be involved at policy level as a member of the church, as our missionary to society, to begin to impact change. So, and to tie this back to our conversation on media is to say, Christian people must arise in the media space. Even in their own media spaces. And every one of us is a media owner.
Yeah.
Because we own digital space.
That's true.
You must enter into your digital space and say, listen, I am the carrier of Christ in this place. I must shine the light. Now, am I absolving the institution? I don't think so. I do think that as leaders, there is a strong place for us to be able to drive the narrative. And I'm not, saying it's one or the other.
Yeah.
But I do want to challenge people about this escape pod mentality. You press a button and you exit.
Yeah.
Look, you're the one who has 500,000 followers.
That's true.
On social media.
That's true.
And I'm like, when will the light come on and you begin to understand, hey, I am the church. I am the body. Christ died for me. I am the one with the voice in that space. Anyway, I can speak about it. But that's, I think part of the church, it's a discipleship failure that we have.
Yeah. Now, just in terms of what you've mentioned, this escape pod mentality that we have as individual Christians, and rightfully so saying that we're not absolving the leaders, the institution from responsibility.
Not at all.
Are there examples that you have where, this collective voice, has been used well in telling the story, whether of a particular community, a particular organization, where both the individual and the institution, so to speak, have worked well?
There's tons of stories. First, let me start with the church itself.
Okay.
You may not realize this, but one of the biggest influences of our times today is media. It's one of the biggest influences. It influences how we speak, what we dress, what we like, what we don't, what we buy, what we don't. And the church, even if we were to start there, was so incredibly invested in the media, maybe a century or so ago, in the mid-20th century, in the 1950s, 1960s.
Yeah.
And when we think about movies and Hollywood, you may be surprised to know that some of the biggest Hollywood blockbusters of a certain generation were actually Christian movies.
Oh.
They were. Ben-Hur, if you've heard of Ben-Hur, Ben-Hur was, Hur is H-U-R, it was just this like monster release from Hollywood that really was a Christian movie. 10 Commandments. Now we watch things like that in the Jesus film and not realize today they are such antiquities. They are, of a past era.
Yeah.
But not realizing that in that season, the church invested so heavily in Hollywood. In fact, in a part of Hollywood, the church owned a major studio that created content.
Wow.
In fact, the church was so influential in Hollywood at one point that, especially the Catholic Church, was so influential that at some point, you could not even have nudity, you could not have obscenity in your movies because the church would just say, no, we're not doing that. We're big players at the table. Now, at some point, what happened is that the church withdrew its interest to go and do real ministry. And what happened is just this ceding of ground and ceding of authority now, where now the church, if you ever see a Christian character in a mainstream movie, they're always making fun of them. They're shady, they're old school, they're backward, they're judgmental and all of that. And that's a story. It's your inability to tell your story. Someone else will tell it for you. So that's one of this. But there are many of them. I like to talk about the LGBT and the the gay agenda and how just some maybe a generation or so ago they were on the fringes of society. Complete fringes of society. They were complete outsiders, and they spent their time, picketing. They spent their time, in advocacy work, involve us, include us. And one day they wisened up and they were just like, you know what, forget the government, forget this arm of society. Let's go and influence people where it really matters. And the gay agenda just began to invest very heavily in Hollywood and in movies and in media. In fact, there's a term you can Google called velvet mafia or gay mafia, where at some point, the gay agenda had planted so many directors, actors, writers in Hollywood to tell their story and to be able to tell their story in a particular light. And slowly, this organization moved from being on the fringes of society, where they were on the outside. When you think of people, I don't know, living with albinism, who are not on the inside of society, that's where they were. And somehow they told their story, they reshaped, they invested. And now they not only moved to the center, they displaced the people who were on the center and pushed them
That's true.
all the way out. And a lot of the learning we have about the gay movement, the gay agenda, comes from Hollywood, comes from television, comes from music, comes from media. And it's telling the best parts, the juiciest parts of their story from their past. I mean, it's a fascinating read to see how they have invested in storytelling. This, you know, the gay agenda now has a media advocacy arm that makes me jealous.
Wow.
As a Christian and as a believer, they have. It's called GLAAD, G-L-A-A-D. I don't know what it stands for. Gay and Lesbian Association Against Discrimination, I think. But that media arm, can I tell you something now? That media arm is so strong and so powerful in the media world globally that they actually ensure if you're on certain platforms, you must have LGBT characters.
Really?
You must. There are people, even Kenyan writers. I was talking to a friend of mine just a few days ago. You have to rewrite your script to get onto certain platforms so that you infuse. They actually count the number of their characters and the perception. There's actually a perception index that they work on. It's intentional. It's well thought through. It's well researched. But they have it's the best case study in the world, I think, of how to use the media to change people's perspectives. So there are many, this is there are many stories. You know.
And it's so fascinating, interesting, and sad at the same time that the church that seems to have a better story to tell. Because, you know, in the example that you've given, for instance, in terms of the gay agenda, they would have to go to great lengths in order to tell their story as a good story. Now, we have a story that is a good story, and unfortunately, we fail to tell it. I think that's a rather sad thing, that we can actually look at those who, as much as I am concerned, whose story is not one that can be readily told, and yet the ones with a story that can be told as it is now in society, we are the ones on the fringes.
Absolutely, and I think it's an interesting one because the challenge with us as the church, and a friend of mine taught me something very important. He said, he's not a pastor, but he said something to me. He said, oftentimes in conversation, you need to learn to substitute the word church with the phrase the community of God's people. Because the church ni wale. The church ni archbishop. It's those guys over there. And he says he's learned as an individual, instead of saying the church should or the church will, says the community of God's people should. The household of faith, the body of Christ should. Then he's like, hiya, I'm part of that thing. That's me. I'm involved in it. He helped me just kind of get this perspective that I am part of it. That's how I make sure I have no escape pod. It's me. I am
inside.
I am in this thing completely. But sorry, I've even forgotten your question. You asked me a question.
No, it is the fact that we have a beautiful story to tell. And unfortunately, it is the story that is not being told.
Absolutely. I agree with you. We've got this, you know, you think about the things that matter in life. You think about marriage. I wish we could tell our story more about what we are doing in the area of marriage. Let me give you some interesting statistics. Up to maybe a few years ago, the church in Kenya, as maligned as it is, had invested 49% of all health facilities in the country Kenya were run by the local by churches and churches.
49%.
49. You can confirm this with the Christian Health Organization of Kenya, CHAC. You can confirm it with KCCB, Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops. Maybe sometimes if you live in urban areas, you don't always see it. But clinics, dispensaries, hospitals that are run by Christian organizations, we don't even know it anymore. We don't even see it anymore. You go to a hospital in Nairobi like Mata Hospital, not realize. You go to a Coptic hospital, you don't realize.
That's true.
The investment that has been made, let me tell you, it's incredible. I sat with the people at CHAC, Christian Health Association of Kenya, and they have this map where they just say, here is all the investment across the entire country of facilities run by Christian organizations.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh my goodness, why has nobody told me this? You may be surprised to know that 1 out of 3, maybe until some years back, the government has really stepped up its investment in education. But up until fairly recently, 1 out of every 3 schools in Kenya was run by the Catholic Church.
Wow.
1 out of every 3. What you're saying is every day the government put 2 shillings on the table, the church put 1.
Wow.
In terms of education.
Yeah.
And if you begin to think about schools, as you go home, as you go to your work, and just begin to look at the schools around you and begin to see. Sometimes we are blinded, to the realities around us. But you get the investment that we have made. So people say, I hear people say the church should be quiet, the church should be quiet, the church should just preach about heaven. And I thought, well, okay, if we did that, if the church in Kenya withdrew in the health sector, that sector would literally collapse. And I am not overstating.
That's true.
Education in Kenya would literally collapse in this nation without the church's investment in this thing.
Wow.
Yet here we are condemning, but I understand it. We haven't told our story. We haven't been able to say, listen, this is what we are doing in terms of, this sector or this sector or this sector. And we go about it quietly. And I think it is time that, the Bible says, let your light so shine before men. So they can see your good deeds. But what will they do when they see your good deeds?
They glorify your Father.
Your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16.
Yeah, wow. Welcome back. This is Motivation Monday, where we begin your week with challenging conversations and inspiring stories. And today we are talking about stories, the power of a story, and specifically how the church can be able to tell its story. We have the best story of all time, and we better tell this story right. And joining me for this conversation is Pastor David Kuria. And what a conversation we are having. What are you learning? What are some of the things that you feel being stirred up and you would love to hear from you? 20316 is our SMS line. 0786316316 is our WhatsApp line. Kindly send us your comments, your feedback. We would love to interact with those. But also, this is a good time for me to remind you that we are able to continue giving you content like this by virtue of partnership with men and women like yourself. And so if you will desire to be our partner, kindly send an SMS with the message, or rather with the word partner, to 20316 and somebody will get back to you. Or if you want to give a gift, feel free to do that through paybill number 316316, and for account, kindly write your phone number. But now let's get back to this conversation, the power of a story. Welcome back, Pastor David Kuria.
Asante.
Wow, wonderful insight. Yeah. Now, as we, I like where we paused just before we listened to that song on the statistics and how amazing it is to actually learn about the contribution of the church to society. Now, by way of application, what then should we do in view of this? And maybe we can begin with the institution or the leaders for that matter. What should we do in view of how we have poorly told our story?
Well, I don't even know if there are, things that I think there are things that are fairly simple and close to us. It's just saying, let's commit ourselves to content, to developing content, to telling our story, to writing it well. Let's, even for me, I'm really challenged about how do we use the power of our institutions? Yeah. How do we leverage them to be able? I'll give you an illustration. A couple of years ago in Kenya, there was a movie that the Kenya Film and Classification Board banned from our movies because they said, hey, this thing has certain sensual or gay agenda kind of themes in it, and we don't want to watch this thing. I'll never forget chatting with a friend of mine. And he said to me, okay, let's ban this thing. What's your alternative? What do you want us to watch?
Yeah.
And that thing really stuck with me, okay. In fact, my senior pastor, Meridio Anjad, Mavuno Church, he tells us, I really like this phrase. He says, don't agonize, organize. It's like there are things in society you agonize about. It's like, stop agonizing. Start organizing yourself. And I think as institutions, we need to figure out, how do we organize? How do we begin to invest collectively, whether it is in films, in podcasts, in storytelling? How do we create platforms that accelerate the people who are already in those fields, that encourage them, that give them direction in those fields? So I think those are some of the things as institutions we need to begin to invest in. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, a Christian filmmaker. They have a movie that's out. It's called Mono the Film. Showed recently in the cinemas. Yeah. And he told me how much it costs to make movies. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, we need to figure out how to use the collective strength that we have to be able to enter those types of spaces. But then also when someone like that creates a movie, how do you give voice to this? How do you, push it? How do you, so all of that. Yeah. So those are some of the things that as institutions that we need to be doing. Yeah.
But one of the things we mentioned earlier is that we have people who are more qualified.
Oh yeah. The practitioners.
The practitioners. So what then for Christian professionals, who are within this media space, what then is their role?
Oh man, let me tell you, that's such a good question, because I feel Christians who are media practitioners, I pray that we don't also fall into this poor discipleship trap, and this escape pod mentality. Yeah. I went recently and watched a fantastic theater production recently. My wife and I went for this. It was brilliant. It really, one of the best things I had ever watched. Christian people who put it together. But there were some scenes there that I looked at and I thought, oh my God. So it was very funny. Yeah. But they really made fun of the church. They really did. Yeah. And everyone was laughing. And I remember sitting there and my heart was so grieved. At some point, it may sound dramatic, I actually walked out. Yeah. And I saw people posting on social media, oh, this is the best production ever. It was so much fun. The music was great. And I said, what these guys don't realize is that they are contributing towards a broken narrative. And I went and I told my team, guys, the team that I lead, and I said to them, guys, we need to be careful that in our engagement, even as media practitioners, that we are doing, the example I gave you of what I call the Blue Bank of Africa. Yes. We are always pushing our product. We are always selling it. We're always telling people, this is why this thing is beautiful. This is why you must be a part of it. Yeah. You see what people don't realize is that there may be parts of the church that are broken. Just like any organization.
That's true.
And when you put a spotlight on those, you in your mind, you may realize that not everything is broken. But for the uninitiated, he will look and he will say, oh, this is the entire church. Yeah. He'll say this 310 thing, this thing of, tithe being misspent or what, of a spiritual parent manipulating people is the whole story. But you have a responsibility to tell the rest of the story. So I think what I'm saying is, if you're a practitioner, I really want to challenge the people who are practitioners in the who are Christians in the media space. You must go against the grain. You must go against. There's a reason God gave you that skill and saved you. There's a reason he pulled you out of the darkness of hell and gave you this incredible skill. And you must figure out, what does this mean for us to be the light of the world? How do we begin to create the kind of content that, I'm not saying create boring content, but create engaging content that helps. Yeah. I had friends of mine who were believers who used to do theater productions. And the one thing that they used to do was marriage. And they would always talk about the value of marriage, the benefit, and they were hilarious plays, they would sell out and what. Yeah. And I'm like, this is what Christians in the media space must do. You must figure out, how am I a light? I challenge a friend of mine who works for one of our local TV stations, an anchor, well-known anchor, and I'm like, my guy, you need to be careful about how are you inserting the right stories, because it's easy. That the church is a glass house. We love throwing stones at it. Yeah. And, pastor caught in scandal. We love that headline. Yeah. But for the Christian editor, you must ask yourself, okay, that's a reality, but what's the other reality? What are other realities?
Yeah.
So we must have our candles on and lit within the space. But I also want to say, then for the ordinary person, mtu wa kawaida,
yes.
now me and you, the people who are, it's a couple of things. One, see yourself as a media owner. Begin to say, listen, I am a media owner because I own my own media.
That's true.
And I'm the editor-in-chief of that media. I'm the one who determines. I want to encourage us, go into your digital space. Begin to tell the stories that are going to help the body that you're a part of.
Yeah.
Begin to push. People are afraid, to go and say, oh, this is the sermon from Sunday, let me share it with somebody. Because you don't get likes and clicks and whatnot and views, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Jesus said, people will hate you. They hated me first. Don't worry about it. People will dislike your comment.
Yeah.
They disliked my posts also.
Yeah.
But it's to say, how do we enter that space? How do we shed the light of Christ in that space? How do we make sure we're not joining the world in ridiculing the church, but that we are playing our part? Also, how do we make sure that we are supporting content creators? How do we make sure your friend is a believer, he's put out a movie, he's put out a play, he has a podcast, that is running? How do you make sure you say, listen, me, I'm going to support this guy because he's telling the truth. This is the light of the world.
Yeah.
I'm going to share it on my socials. I'm going to share it on my WhatsApp. I'm going to watch a show like this and say, you know what? Somebody needs to see this and share. We are afraid of doing that because we don't want to go against the grain.
Yeah.
But I do think that everyone, the institution has responsibility. The media practitioners who are believers have a responsibility. And the body of Christ, it needs, that escape pod button needs to be jammed forever.
Yeah.
And say, I'm dying with this thing.
Yeah.
If you attack it, you're attacking me. This is who I am. We all have responsibility.
Wow. And maybe just a thought that has occurred to me even as we wrap this up. Do you think we're just lazy? We don't want to put in the work that goes into powerfully telling our own story?
It's a good thought. I don't know whether we are lazy or not. I don't know if that's the word that I would use. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
What I do want to say is that every one of us must, there's this thing. Once you know, once you're aware, now you have responsibility. You've watched this show, now you have responsibility to go out and say, let's do, let's create, let's tell our story, let's shine a spotlight on what is working. Because what is working is way more. I tell people, for every flawed pastor who's taking advantage of a child or stealing money, there's 50 of them who are quietly going about their work doing the right thing. Yeah. Who are quietly going about their work building society. Spotlight them. Yeah. So I don't know about laziness, but I want to say that maybe we haven't taken our responsibility. Yeah. And there's a place now to say, I am the light of the world. I will be the light of the world.
Wow. Thank you so much, Pastor David Kuria. Really love this conversation. I am challenged.
Thank you.
Myself, there are spaces now I have to get into that I had vowed never to get into. But I guess the story must be told. And thank you for people like you who have taken upon yourself to actually tell the story of the church and to tell it correctly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I loved it.
All right. Well, we have come to the end of our conversation for today. Today we were talking about the power of a story, and specifically as we look at how the church can tell its story, the greatest story of all, that unfortunately we've not been able to tell it as we ought to. We pray and hope that this conversation has been of benefit to you. Indeed, we pray and hope that this conversation will transform and change your perception towards this thing we call the church. In fact, like we've been told, maybe we just start calling it the community of God's people. And we pray and hope that God will help us to tell our story better. This is goodbye from us, but immediately after this is praise the Lord. But we hope to hear from you. In what ways will you start appropriating some of these things that we've talked about? And so 20316 is our SMS line. 0786 316 316 is our WhatsApp line. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Until next week, goodbye.